My uncle was dying. He left me his entire estate. $3.8 million, his house, his printing business. My family said it all belonged to them. When I refused to hand it over, my father texted me the eviction notice himself. I was 29 years old. I worked 40 hours a week organizing shelves in an elementary school library, and I drove a 2011 Honda Civic with a cracked rear bumper I kept meaning to get fixed. My Thursday nights were spent lesson planning, read-alouds for second graders. My splurge was the $14 wine from Trader Joe's. I was not a person anything dramatic was supposed to happen to. But before I tell you how everything fell apart and then somehow came back together, I need to tell you about my uncle, because without understanding who he was, none of the rest of it makes sense. My uncle was my father's younger brother. He never went to college. He spent his 20s working at a commercial print shop in Roanoke, Virginia, learning every machine in the building, then saved enough to buy the place when the owner retired. He renamed it Kessler Print and Design, added a second location on the north side of town, and built it into something real over 30 years. He wasn't flashy about it. He drove the same Ford F-150 for 16 years, lived in the same split-level house on Maple Creek Road that he'd bought with his wife before she passed, and wore the same brand of Wranglers every single day of his adult life. My father was embarrassed by him. That's the thing I always noticed as a kid. My father, who sold financial products for a living and kept a framed photo of his golf handicap on his desk, would come home from holiday dinners at my uncle's house and spend the drive back picking apart every detail. The wrong brand of beer, the used furniture in the living room, the way my uncle's hands always looked like he'd just come in from the shop, ink under the nails, knuckles rough. He's sitting on a real asset and he doesn't even know it, my father used to say, shaking his head. Wasted potential. What my father actually meant was that the money wasn't flowing in the right direction. My older brother had the same attitude, just louder about it. He was a residential real estate agent, with an affinity for expensive watches and an even more expensive inability to save money. He would visit my uncle every few years, and every single time, he'd come back with a new story about how he'd run the numbers on the print shop, how if they sold the building, restructured the business, leveraged the commercial property on the north side of town, they could all make a killing. He said we like it was already decided. I never once heard my uncle agree to any of it. What I heard from my uncle was different. He talked about his employees by name. The guy who'd been running the large format machine for 18 years, the woman who managed client accounts and had put 2 kids through community college on her salary. He talked about them like they were people he was responsible for, because he was. He understood that in a way my father and brother never did. I spent my summers at his house from the time I was 9 until I left for college. My parents would drop me off for 2 weeks every July, which I think was their way of getting a break from me. I was quiet. I preferred books to parties. I didn't perform well at the dinner table conversations my mother staged for her friends. I was, in her words, a lot to explain. My uncle never needed an explanation for me. He just let me exist in his house, in his workshop, in the comfortable silence of Saturday mornings, when we'd drive to the diner on Route 11 for eggs, and he'd read the paper, and I'd read whatever novel I'd brought, and neither of us needed to fill the quiet with anything. He paid for my college education, every semester without being asked. I told him I was majoring in library science, and he didn't say a single word to suggest that wasn't a perfectly good thing to do with a life. When I graduated, he mailed me a card with a check for $500 and wrote inside, "The world needs more people who know where the books are. I'm proud of you." It was the only time anyone in my family said those words to me. When he got the cancer diagnosis, stage 4, non-small cell lung cancer, October 2 years ago, my family suddenly became very interested in spending time with him. My mother started calling him every week, which she hadn't done in years. My father drove up from Richmond twice in the first month, more than he'd visited in the previous 5. My brother started showing up with grocery bags and talking loudly about being there for family. His wife photographed every visit and posted it. Spending time with the best uncle-in-law. Family is everything. 43 likes. I drove up every Tuesday and Friday. I sat with him through the chemo infusions, which took 4 hours and left him wrung out and gray-faced. I learned what he could eat afterward and what made him sick. I brought library books he'd actually want. History, biographies, a few westerns he liked, and I sat in the recliner across from his and read while he slept. I wasn't there for performance. I was there because I couldn't imagine not being there. He died on a Thursday in late March, quietly in his own bed the way he'd wanted. The funeral was the first time in years I'd seen the whole family assembled in one place, and I spent most of it feeling like I was watching a play I hadn't been given a script for. My father stood at the front of the church, like he was receiving guests at a gala. My mother wore a hat. My brother gave a reading, and his voice broke at exactly the right moment. His wife placed a hand on his back and dabbed at the corner of one eye. I stood beside the casket and thought about Tuesday mornings, and the smell of the hospital infusion center, and the way my uncle always said, "Thank you" to the nurses by name, every single time. 2 weeks later, we drove to Mr. Beaumont's office for the reading of the will. The office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown, modest and quiet, with a waiting room that smelled like carpet cleaner and old file folders. My father sat with his legs crossed, looking like a man who'd already decided how the meeting would go. My brother kept his phone face up on his knee. His wife smoothed her skirt. My mother held her purse in her lap with both hands. Mr. Beaumont was in his 60s, trim and careful. With reading glasses he kept setting down and picking back up. He went through the standard language, last will and testament of sound mind and body, witnessed and notarized. And my father nodded along like he was approving a memo. Then Mr. Beaumont looked up from the document. His eyes found mine across the table. "The estate of Desmond Allen Kessler," he said, "including Kessler Print and Design, both commercial locations, the residential property at 44 Maple Creek Road, and all liquid and investment accounts, valued in total at approximately $3.8 million, is bequeathed in its entirety to one beneficiary." My father uncrossed his legs. "His niece," Mr. Beaumont said, "Alma Renee Kessler, is the sole heir." The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever heard. It was thick and total, the kind that has weight to it. I remember staring at the edge of the table. My first thought was that there had been a mistake. My second thought was that I didn't know my middle name was in his will at all. My father was the first to speak. His voice was controlled in that specific way it got when he was furious and working hard not to show it. "Say that again." "The will is unambiguous," Mr. Beaumont said without blinking. "Everything goes to Alma." He was sick. My mother's voice was sharp. He wasn't thinking clearly. He was on medication. "He was of sound mind," Mr. Beaumont said. "Multiple physicians confirmed it in writing within the last 8 months. He was also very deliberate about this decision. He left a video message for the family, which he asked me to play at this reading." He turned his laptop to face us. And then my uncle was there, sitting in his living room on Maple Creek Road, in his recliner, wearing the gray thermal pullover he'd practically lived in during treatment. He looked tired. He looked like himself. "Hey, everyone," he said, and even through the laptop speakers his voice sounded like him, steady and plain. "If you're watching this, I guess I finally ran out of time. That's okay, I had a good run." He looked directly at the camera. "I know some of you are going to be upset about what you just heard. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But I need you to understand something." He paused, and for a moment he seemed to be collecting his thoughts, or maybe just his patience. "For 32 years, I built that business. I made every decision. I got up early and stayed late and took care of my people and paid my taxes, and I was proud of what I made. And in all that time, I watched my family. I watched who called when they needed something and who called just to talk. I watched who came when I got sick because they loved me, and who came because they started doing the math." My brother shifted in his seat. "I know about the $40,000, my uncle said, looking somewhere just past the camera lens. "I know about all of it. I forgive you. But I don't trust you. There's a difference." He looked back into the camera. "Alma came every Tuesday and every Friday for 6 months. She never once asked me for anything. She brought books. She learned what I could eat after chemo, and she just showed up with the right thing. Like it was nothing. Like it was just what you do." His voice didn't break, but it softened in a way that made the room feel different. "She's the only person in this family who ever knew me. Not what I was worth. The business, the house, the money. That's not a reward. It's a responsibility, and there's only one person I trust with it." The screen went black. My father stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. He pointed at me. "You did this. You poisoned him against his own family." I thought, I just sat with him through chemotherapy. I thought, I don't know how to poison anyone. I thought, he made his own decision, as he always made his own decisions, and that is exactly what terrifies you. But I didn't say any of it. I sat there while my mother talked about contest proceedings, and while my brother stared at me with a look I'd never seen on his face before. Not anger exactly, but something colder than that. 3 hours later, my father sent me a text. Attached to it was a lease termination notice from a company called Kessler Ridge Properties, LLC. I had been renting my apartment in Richmond for 4 years. I had never known that my father owned the building. It was buried in an LLC I'd never had any reason to look up. His initials, a family name, something that blended into the background noise of documents I'd signed without scrutinizing. Effective immediately, the notice said, then listed a series of alleged lease violations that I knew were fabricated. Legally, I had rights. Virginia state law required proper notice and process, and what he was doing wasn't legal. I knew that, in the abstract, the way you know things you've never had to actually use. But it was 9 o'clock at night, and my uncle had been dead for 2 weeks, and I had just watched his face on a laptop screen say my name like it meant something. And the only family I had ever genuinely loved was gone, and the people who were supposed to love me had just found a new way to prove they didn't. I packed 3 bags, clothes, the quilt I'd had for 15 years, the coffee mug my uncle had given me the Christmas before he got sick, the shoebox of letters and cards he'd sent me over the years, and the copy of To Kill a Mockingbird that still had his handwriting in the margins. I left the furniture, I left the dishes, I got in my car and I drove. I ended up on Maple Creek Road because I didn't know where else to go. Mr. Beaumont had given me the house key at the end of the will reading. I'd put it in my coat pocket and forgotten it was there until I was standing on my uncle's front porch at 11:30 at night, with nowhere else to be. The house smelled exactly like it always had, machine oil and coffee, and the particular dustiness of old books. I stood in the dark living room for a long time without turning on a light. His recliner was still there. The TV remotes were still lined up on the side table the way he always kept them. The mug I'd washed and put away on my last Tuesday visit was still in the cabinet where I'd left it. I made it to the couch before I started crying, and then I cried until there was nothing left. I woke up to a knock at the door. It was just past 8 in the morning. Mr. Beaumont was standing on the porch, holding 2 coffees from the diner on Route 11 and a paper bag that turned out to contain a blueberry muffin and an egg sandwich. He said, "I thought you might end up here. I'm sorry it took me this long to get to you." He sat down at my uncle's kitchen table and opened his briefcase, and he said, "Your uncle started preparing this 5 years ago. He saw this coming. He didn't just leave you money, Alma. He left you everything you need to protect it." The folder he laid on the table was thick, printed emails, notarized documents, bank records, every loan my brother had taken from my uncle and never repaid. $40,000 over 7 years, in increments that were clearly calculated to seem small enough not to cause a scene. There were letters my uncle had written and kept, documenting the conversations, the broken promises, the excuses. There was a formal demand letter he'd sent 2 years prior that had gone unanswered. And then there was a USB drive. He installed a security system last spring, Mr. Beaumont said. He told me it was because the neighborhood had seen some break-ins. Maybe that was part of it. He opened his laptop, but I think he also knew that when he was gone, some people might decide the rules didn't apply to them anymore. He plugged in the drive and turned the screen toward me. The footage was time-stamped the afternoon after the funeral, the living room, the front door opening, my brother walking in and his wife behind him. They moved quickly and efficiently, like people who had planned this. His wife went straight to the bookshelf in the study, where my uncle kept a fireproof lockbox on the second shelf. She knew exactly where it was. She took out a folded piece of paper, a list, and started working through it. My brother went to the desk. His wife pocketed a watch that had belonged to my uncle's father, a silver money clip, a set of cufflinks engraved with my uncle's initials. My brother took the envelope of cash my uncle always kept in the top left drawer of his desk, $260. "They took things," I said. My voice came out flat. "Yes," Mr. Beaumont said. "They did, and your uncle anticipated this." He paused. "There are people who want to help you today if you're willing, people who knew him and respected him and who he asked me to contact." I said yes, because I had no other answer. By 11 that morning, the kitchen table was full. Josephine had been my uncle's neighbor for 22 years. She was in her 70s, small and deliberate, with the kind of calm that comes from having survived a great deal. She brought a casserole dish and a spiral notebook, handwritten notes she'd been keeping at my uncle's request for the past year and a half, logging visits, conversations, anything that seemed relevant to the pattern she'd been watching. She slid it across the table without comment. Miss Yoon had been my uncle's CPA for 15 years. She laid out the financial records methodically, the loans, the business accounts, the estate valuation. She also mentioned, almost in passing, that my uncle had retained a forensic accountant 8 months ago to document everything in a format that would hold up in court. The last person to arrive was Judge Sims, who had been my uncle's friend since they'd coached Little League together in the early 90s. He was retired now, quiet and steady, and he sat down at the kitchen table in a cardigan and said simply, "Tell me what you need." What I needed, it turned out, was all of them. The next morning, my brother sent a text. "We'll be there at 10. We need to sort this out." The "we" was doing a lot of work in that sentence. They arrived in 2 cars, dressed in clothes that were meant to say something about power. My father in a blazer. My mother with her lips pressed into a line. My brother in business casual that communicated lawyer adjacent. His wife carrying a tote bag that probably had documents in it. Mr. Beaumont opened the door before they could knock. They walked into the living room expecting to find me alone. They found a table full of people. I watched my father's face change. Not much, but enough. The way his eyes moved across the room, cataloging. Josephine with her hands folded, Miss Yoon with her briefcase open. Judge Sims in his cardigan, watching them with the kind of stillness that comes with decades on the bench. Mr. Beaumont standing beside me. "What is all this?" my father said. "These are people who loved him," I said, "and people who are going to help me protect what he built." My father started with the will. "Undue influence," he said. My uncle had been on pain medication, hadn't been thinking clearly. I had isolated him from the real family. He spoke with confidence, the way he always did, and he glanced at my brother for confirmation, and my brother nodded. Mr. Beaumont let him finish. Then Judge Sims leaned forward and folded his hands on the table. "I had dinner with Desmond 11 days before he passed," he said, in the tone of someone used to being the last person to speak in a room. "We talked for 3 hours. He beat me at cribbage, which he always did. He was more lucid than most 50-year-olds I know. I have a notarized statement to that effect, as do the 2 physicians who evaluated him last fall." He paused. "I'd be very careful about the direction you're taking this." My father opened his mouth, closed it. Miss Yoon laid the loan documents on the coffee table, one by one. The amounts, the dates, the emails in which my brother had acknowledged the debts and promised repayment. The final demand letter that had gone unanswered. $41,200 outstanding, she said, with applicable interest, closer to 44. My brother's jaw tightened. Those were private family matters. "They were documented private family matters," Miss Yoon said evenly. "There's a difference." Then Mr. Beaumont turned his laptop around. My mother saw herself on the screen first. I watched her recognize it. The living room, the afternoon light, the familiar angle from the security camera in the corner she'd never noticed. She went very still. My brother made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. "The items taken from this property on the afternoon of March 31st, Mr. Beaumont said, include a silver pocket watch appraised at $1,200, a set of engraved cufflinks, a silver money clip, and $260 in cash. I've already provided a copy of this recording to the Roanoke County Sheriff's Office, along with an itemized list and the relevant appraisal documentation." My brother's wife stood up. "You can't." "It's already done," Mr. Beaumont said very quietly. The room was silent. My father turned to me, and for the first time in my life, there was no performance in his face, no managed disappointment, no careful calculation. He just looked old and caught and small. "You would do this to your own family," he said. I had been quiet my whole life. I'd been quiet at dinner tables where no one asked about my students. Quiet in rooms where my achievements were described as hobbies. Quiet when the love I was supposed to feel was offered back as conditions and obligations. I'd been so quiet for so long that I think they had genuinely forgotten I had a voice. "You spent 30 years telling me to stand on my own 2 feet," I said. "I'm doing that." I walked to the front door and opened it. Mr. Beaumont will be in contact with your attorney about the estate. If you want to discuss the outstanding loans or the items taken from this property, you can do that through him. But you need to leave now. My brother looked at his wife. My mother looked at my father. No one had a next move. They left. The sound of the door closing behind them was the quietest, most complete sound I had ever heard. The legal process in the months that followed moved slowly, and then all at once. The will was not contested. Not after Mr. Beaumont filed the documentation. Not after Judge Sims submitted his affidavit. Not after 3 physicians provided written confirmation of my uncle's clarity and competence. The sheriff's office opened a formal investigation into the property taken from the house. My brother and his wife eventually reached a restitution agreement that also addressed the outstanding loans. And as part of the terms, the matter of his real estate license came under review. 3 clients terminated contracts with him in the weeks after it became local news. His wife stopped posting about family. I filed the necessary documents to continue Kessler Print and Design under existing management. The woman who had been running client accounts for 16 years, the one my uncle had talked about, whose kids had graduated from community college on her salary, agreed to step into the general manager role. I met with her in April in my uncle's office, and she told me what she needed to keep the business running well. I told her I trusted her to make it work. She looked at me for a moment and then said, "He talked about you, you know? He said you were the only one who ever sat with him, just to sit." I had to look out the window for a while after that. I kept my job at the library. My principal was surprised, I think, when I came back after spring break and sat back down at the circulation desk and started re-stickering returned books the way I always did on Monday mornings. People asked the way people ask, and I didn't have a short answer, so mostly I just said I was doing okay and meant it. What I did do was fund the school library renovation that had been on the district wish list for 4 years and never made it into the budget. New shelving, new carpet, a reading nook in the corner with built-in benches that a local carpenter built over the summer, a graphic novel collection that the kids cleaned out in the first 2 weeks. The principal sent me a thank you note on district letterhead, and I kept it in the same box as my uncle's letters. I moved into the house on Maple Creek Road. I kept it mostly the same, the furniture, the layout, his recliner. I planted tomatoes in the back garden in May because he had always meant to and never gotten around to it. They didn't produce much the first year, but they came up, and that felt like enough. On Tuesday and Friday evenings, the kitchen table fills up now. Josephine comes for dinner most weeks. Miss Ewan stops by when she's in the neighborhood. Judge Sims comes for coffee on Sunday mornings, and we play cribbage badly, and neither of us wins as often as we should. I thought for a long time that the story was about the money. That's what everyone wants to know. The number, what I did with it, whether it changed me. But the money was just what made it loud. The real story is quieter than that. My uncle knew me. He knew me the way you know a person when you've sat with them through long, ordinary afternoons with nothing to prove to each other. He chose to trust me with the thing he had spent his life building, not because I had earned it by any measurable standard, but because he believed I would carry it the right way. I think about that on the hard days, when the paperwork is overwhelming, or the business has a rough quarter, or I'm sitting in his house and I miss him so much it feels like something physical. I think he left me a responsibility. He left me a reason. And he left me a community of people who loved him and have somehow decided to love me too. That's not $3.8 million. That's something you can't put a number on, and it turns out that's the only kind of inheritance worth having.